All right, happy summer, Aspire leaders and Teach Better family. Thank you so much for joining me again this week. I know that it is summertime and you could easily be on the lake, going on vacation, doing a million different things to get your mind right for the beginning of the school year. But appreciate your time, and wherever you are, I have a wonderful, phenomenal guest. He's an author, he's an administrator, and we're going to dive into a lot of different topics, including one of his new books and something that's coming out that we're going to tease that's coming out in October, which I'm super excited about. But I have Bob Sonju with me, and with that, I want to thank you for being on Aspire to Lead.
Great, and thanks for having me, Josh.
Yeah, so man, your bio is full of experience. You've been a principal of a state, principal of the year for a state in Utah. I'm super excited to learn more about your journey. So if you wouldn't mind just sharing about your educational and leadership background, I would love to start there and then jump into our conversation in regards to one of your books.
Absolutely. I got into education kind of a different path. I knew I wanted to be an educator, but I tried to avoid it for long. I went into communications and I went into business and marketing and all of these different things, but I just kept coming back to education, and I just realized I just love education. And so I started out as a teacher, teaching language arts and special education at the high school level, and loved that. In all honesty, I started teaching because I wanted to coach baseball, and I knew that was my way in. And after about a month, I of course love baseball, but I fell in love with teaching, and fell in love with just learning and students, and especially those students who really struggle. I just fell in love there. So I knew that was where I was destined to be. So from there, moved into school administration at the high school level, and then at the intermediate level, was a principal at an intermediate level, kind of a hybrid elementary middle level school. Spent 6 years at the district level, a large district. We're about 40,000 students, and was the executive director of teaching and learning. But after 2 years, I talked to our superintendent and said, listen, I just really appreciate this job and I love the work we're doing, but I need to be in schools. I need to be with teachers, with kids. I need to be rolling my sleeves up, engaged in this work. So there was a school being built, and so I finished out. I spent 6 years at the district, and then was reassigned to the school where I finished my career there with teachers and with students. So yeah, that's my journey.
That's awesome. Well, let's dive in, if you don't mind, about the book, Simplifying the Journey, that you wrote. And also, I'd love to hear the background about why the book was written in the first place, because I know obviously when you're an author, you see a need somewhere and then
Yeah.
you start getting this passion and then you have to put it on paper. So curious about what the book is all about, the synopsis there, and then also the why behind the resource.
Yeah, yeah. Simplifying the journey was kind of a journey in itself. I have my co-authors, Marin Powers and Shalene Miller, who are fantastic educators. We just got together and we were um, discussing professional learning communities. Obviously, it's research-based best practice in our field,
Yep.
and but we started to recognize just through our experiences, personal experiences, mistakes we had made, and schools that we worked at, that teachers had a pretty good understanding of the four critical questions that drive a professional learning community, but how to answer those, they started to kind of go all over the place, right? And then on top of that, in education, teachers are just bombarded with new shiny things. We've always got the newest program, the newest thing that's going to improve us. And so there's just a lot of educational noise in education that teachers are dealing with right now. And so we just felt the need to just cut through all of the educational noise and just say, this is how to answer those four critical questions of the professional learning community process. So from that, Simplifying the Journey was born.
Awesome. So you had just touched on real quick about the four questions. I'm curious what those were.
Yeah, the four questions of a professional learning community, brilliant in nature. First off, we've got to get real clear on what all students need to know and be able to do.
Yep.
We can't say all of the standards, because that's virtually impossible. So we've got to get crystal clear on those at the course and grade level that all students need to know to be successful in that course level, and of course beyond. The second question, once we're clear on what it is they need to know, we got to figure out if they're getting it or not getting it, right? We need to know if they're learning it or not learning it. And that speaks to assessment. And that's not just wait until the end of the unit or the end of the year to figure that out, but frequent formative assessments that we give as teams along the way. Question number 3, we know we're going to teach something the very best way we know how during our initial instruction. We're still going to have some kids that didn't get it. So question 3 speaks to how are we going to collectively respond to those kids that didn't get it? And finally, question 4, what about those kids who pick it up quickly or who already know it? How are we going to deepen their learning in those essential areas? So those are the 4 questions that drive the work of a professional learning community. Brilliant authors, Rick and Becky Dufour and Dr. Bob Aker, they were the architects of this original work, and simplifying the journey just supports those 4 questions. This is how we answer those questions in 6 action steps.
Awesome. Well, perfect segue to kind of the core of the book, which are those 6 action steps associated with the Simplifying the Journey book. So if you wouldn't mind, I would love to hear about those 6 and why it's so important in the work that you're doing.
Yeah. So I kind of mentioned earlier, we've got too many standards. I mean, every educator will agree, every educator on the planet agrees, there's just too many standards. And within those standards, there's some that would be considered maybe nice to know, and then some that are, you've got to know this to be successful in this course or grade level. And so the first step in simplifying the journey for teams is just to get real clear on what kids have to know in the course or grade level. We call that essential learnings, but we've got to get clear on not only those essential standards, but the skills that the students will need to be successful. The next action step just follows right along with that. And this is a step that we feel like is forgotten oftentimes in the work of collaborative teams. We think a lot of teams, and I did this, to be honest with you. My first school, we were like, hey, we've got to identify essential standards. And we identified essential standards across all content areas. And then we lit up that lamination machine and we laminated those babies and we had them all over the walls of the school. And then we sat back and we waited for magic to happen. And guess what happened? Nothing, zero. Nothing happened because we had forgotten an important step, and that was action number 2. Once we identify essential standards, then we have to sit as professional educators and say, what is the standard saying, and what will a student be able to do that masters that? So we've got to get clear on what that will look like in student work from teacher to teacher. So when we go back to our classrooms, we're all valuing not only the same standards, but we also know what mastery looks like for each of those. So that's step number 2, getting crystal clear. Shared clarity and defined mastery is what we call it, which leads to action number 3. And action number 3 speaks to student engagement. And I think far too often, students just sit passively in classrooms and let information just wash over them.
Yep.
I think what we lack in engagement there is having them be a part of their learning. When we define what mastery looks like, then we can make learning visible for the students through examples in the classrooms, and students can begin to own their work because they can monitor their pathway toward mastery. So that's action number 3. Action number 4 and 5 are kind of interconnected. I think far too often we use assessment as just a tool to put a score in the book, in the grade book. And we want to kind of rethink that a little bit. Action 4 speaks to formative assessment, using that for feedback, for very targeted feedback regarding where the student is on their pathway to mastery, feedback regarding their strengths and next steps that the student can take, and then finally feedback that we get as educators regarding if our instructional strategies are landing or not landing. And so question 4 is just using formative assessment for targeted feedback. And then action number 5 goes right along with that. When teams assess together using the same tool and they clearly know what mastery looks like, then they can take this data and they can learn together from the data, what's working, what's not working, who's getting it, who's not getting it, trends in student learning, and so on. So I think that's a powerful step, learning from this formative assessment data. And then action number 6 is very simple. We've got some kids that are going to get it quickly. What are we going to do with them? And some kids that are going to need extra time and support in order to achieve mastery. And we need to make plans for them. So we just felt as practitioners and as authors, if teams engage in those 6 action steps, students will learn and their collective teacher efficacy will increase dramatically. All of this is couched in collaboration.
Oh man, so powerful. Bob, I wish I would have had this resource when I was administrator, because you had talked about kind of just, putting up the standards and trying to identify the ones that are important, and then just kind of sitting back and hoping that people will, follow that lead. And it just fell apart. So I love these steps, these 6 action steps associated with simplifying the journey. For those who are looking to purchase this resource, of course, I will have the link in the show notes at joshchamber.com or on all of the various podcast platforms and YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, you probably see me drinking this lovely Magic Mind drink. Just wanted to remind everyone that you probably heard me speak about this powerful, all natural ingredient drink that is a powerful little shot, and you can get it free, and it goes to the end of the month. So I'm going to put up on the screen real quick. If you go to magicmind.com/aspire-to-lead trial, you'll get 3 drinks for free. So once you go and put that in your cart, just make sure that you're using the code aspire-to-lead trial. And I promise you're going to see a jolt of energy. And I will say I've been under the weather the last 2 days, and I can promise you that Magic Mind has helped me. I feel better quickly because it's all natural drink, and there's a ton of natural ingredients in there. So I won't take too much time, Bob, talking about this phenomenal drink, but I'm a super fan, and I think everyone should at least give it a try over at magicmind.com/aspire-to-lead trial and get your free drinks. So with that, Bob, I want to pick your brain because you had talked about just the amount of experience you have in administration and leadership. And I just want to ask you about some of the important qualities that you think make up an effective team for a school and a district.
An effective team, I believe, is just a willingness to learn. I think we get on a slippery slope as educators, and I've fallen prey to this, that we feel like as educators, we need to be the purveyors of all knowledge. We need to have every answer to every question. And I think that's a slippery slope. And instead, I think teams that see themselves as learners, that communicate, we're learners along with our students, I think that's powerful for teams to have that approach to their work, their collective work. So, yeah.
All right, I want to talk about a term that you've coined, intellectual humility. So will you just kind of give a background of where that term came from and what is the meaning behind it?
Yeah, and that's a nice segue, by the way, Josh. So it's not a term that I coined at all. It's just something that I discovered in my reading. It's called intellectual humility, and essentially, there's a lot of writing about this, but essentially, 90% of what we believe to be true is oftentimes we formed this opinion based on flawed information, and then we take that and that becomes our truth, right? And so this idea of intellectual humility is just, for lack of better terms, an open mindedness, a willing to think differently, to maybe um, seek to understand that we don't have all the answers, and maybe what I believe is true and accurate could be based on flawed information. And so it's this search for just truth, and to be willing to think and then be willing to rethink some of our fundamental assumptions that we've had. So that's been kind of an area that I've been studying and really been fascinated with lately. So
Yeah, and oh man, there's so many examples of being an administrator where that would have been nice to have, not only within the leadership team, but then also as a campus culture. So I'm curious, how do we get people to kind of have that mindset? Because I think you're right, 100% right in regards to that. And um, not just taking our own viewpoint, but also open to the idea that we might have some biases, we might have some faults within our thinking, and maybe it's not the truth that we hold, that there might be a different way of thinking. But how do we kind of infuse that so it's campus wide?
yeah, and I think it starts with these action steps that we've talked about. First off, when we identify essential standards, um, this sounds like an easy step, but we all, as individual teachers, we value different things in the curriculum. I'm going to value something very different than my neighbor will. And so, and I think when we just get dug in on what we think is absolutely important, um, we kind of lose that intellectual humility. So I just think this simplifying the journey process really encourages this idea of, let's learn together. Let's study these standards together. Action step number 5, learning from the data. When we give these frequent formative assessments together, most of the time we take this assessment data, and you've been an educator, and you're an educator, and the educators that are listening, we take this data, and the first thing, our natural reaction is to compare. I want to compare with my neighbor. I want to look at my student scores, and I want to see if my neighbor's scores are higher. If my scores aren't as high as my neighbor's scores, then we get this alibiing that comes into the conversation. Well, I've got more kids in my classroom, or I've got those 2 kids that just moved in. Those kids. So we get this alibi taking place, and I just think in action step number 5, we talk about this. We want to remove the emotion from looking at data, and we need to study the practice and see how the practice impacted learning. So we're not looking at Joshua and Bob and comparing our scores. We're actually looking at how Joshua taught that. You use this particular strategy. Let's see how kids responded. Bob used this particular strategy, so let's see how his kids responded. That's the essence of a learning community, is learning together, right? And this idea of intellectual humility is just the foundation of that we're willing to think differently about how we teach and learn from each other. um, I use the example all the time with educators. Have you ever taught something last year using a particular strategy, and kids learned like crazy? You're like, where is the administrator? I need to be evaluated right now. And and then you use that same strategy this year, and the kids look at you like you're speaking another language. That doesn't mean that you were just an excellent teacher last year and you're just not quite as good this year. It just means the strategy landed last year and it just didn't land this year. So action step number 5 speaks to this idea of just learning together from the data. We're not comparing teacher to teacher, but instead it's a giant action research project that we can do weekly. We can figure out what strategies are landing with kids. And then when we figure out, Joshua, you had a strategy that really clicked, the expectation is that you'll share that so we can learn together. And some of those students that didn't get it, we're going to use that strategy. We're just adding more tools to our tool belt. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's awesome, Bob. And man, if I was a teacher and it landed with a strategy, I probably would have run into my principal, be like, you got to be in my classroom for next year. And then it wouldn't have landed when they were there. That would have been my luck.
Exactly, right?
So I love that. I love the term community, because I really do think that's the overarching piece here. Because you're right. Once we get those state scores, we start to compare ourselves to our neighbor, to our team, to the school next door to us, to the district, to the state. I mean, there's a lot of comparisons that go in that. And sometimes too, it doesn't feel like a community. It feels like a competition. So then I
Right.
close my door and I become a silo on that campus, versus like you're talking about, is let's put everything on the table, and let's work together as a community to help everyone involved. And I just love that so much, that mindset.
Yeah, it really speaks to the essence of a learning community. Oftentimes, people will think a professional learning community is a professional paperwork community, or a professional "this is the way we've always done it" community, or a professional perfection community. It's a bunch of professionals in a school community learning together, and that's why we study the standards together. That's why we get clear on what mastery looks like together. That's why we assess together and we learn from this data together, figuring out which strategies are landing and not landing so we can utilize those in future instruction as well as during our intervention efforts. So,
Awesome. So we had just kind of teased out, Bob, a new resource coming out in October, the Handbook of Highly Effective Teams. So if you wouldn't mind, I would love to learn a little bit about that and what folks can anticipate here in October.
yeah, the foundational book on professional learning communities is aptly named Learning by Doing.
Yeah,
The fourth edition just came out. It's sold over 1 million copies worldwide. It's just foundational and a wonderful resource. In Learning by Doing, there's a template, and it's called Critical Issues for Team Consideration. And there's 18 critical issues that teams evaluate themselves on. And my colleagues, Bill Ferreter, Anissa Baker Busby, and Kim Monkers, got together and said, it would be great if we could just take each of these um, individual issues and address each of those. And so that's the book, the Handbook of Highly Effective Teams. It'll be very useful, loaded with templates, but more of a how-to. Yeah.
perfect. So we'll make sure that that information gets out to the Aspire leaders out in October, to make sure that they're grabbing that resource. Also, for today, though, Bob, I'd love for you just to speak on an actual step. Obviously, we created the podcast for folks to gain insight and wisdom from our guests, but they also need to be doing something, right? They need to activate. So, what can they do for our aspiring or current leaders tomorrow and next week to enhance their leadership journey?
Yeah, that's a great question. And simplifying the journey, actually, the 6 action steps, each chapter or action step is divided into a few parts, very predictable parts in each action step. The first is what it is. We describe what the action is, and then how to lead that from a principal perspective, a team leader perspective, what that looks like when you lead that particular action step. And then the next is how to do it. Like, what do teacher teams do? This is what the work looks like, and there's examples, templates, and strategies. And then the next part is how to coach it. We've got some wonderful instructional coaches out there, and principals, administrators are coaches as well. So there's targeted questions to ask and how to coach each action step. So how to lead it, how to do it, how to coach it, and then we finish up each action step with just kind of words to the wise. Just we've been down this road. Here's some things to watch out for. Here's some things to make sure you do and watch out for. The leadership piece, I think, is critical because in leadership, whether it's team leadership or a leadership team or a principalship, oftentimes there's not a lot of help. There's not a lot of preparation that goes into that. You're just hired to be a new principal and you're shown your school, given your keys, and very little preparation or support. And so principals do their very best trying to figure out what this looks like, what to pay attention to, and so on. So in each action step, we articulate four steps that leaders need to engage in. And I just am confident that if leaders follow these action steps, if leaders follow these four things in each action step, they'll experience success as a leader. Number one, we've got to clarify what the work is. We can't tell people, okay, go and collaborate, because we'll be all over the place. We can't say, go identify essential standards. We've got to clarify what that work is. And that's a critical first step for any principal, assistant principal, team leader, leadership team. They've got to clarify what that work looks like. Kind of a funny story with that. I got to my last school, and here I've written books about this work and just been engaged as a learner. And I got with my leadership team. It was the first few months of school, and our focus for leadership team meeting was collaboration. And I wanted feedback on how collaboration was going. And to be honest with you, I expected to just kind of get some validation and, oh, things are wonderful. And my leadership team sat back and they were like, Bob, it is a hot mess. And I'm like, wait, what? And they were like, listen, we as a leadership team, we made crystal clear why collaboration is important and what the purpose is. And we gave them plenty of collaborative time, but we never clarified what does effective collaboration look like. And so we saw that teams were just kind of running all over the place with their interpretation, and it wasn't their fault. We weren't very good at clarifying what that work looked like. So the first step for leaders is clarify what the work is. Second, because these action steps may be a change in thinking for teachers, change is difficult, and we know this. So we as leaders have an obligation to support teachers and support teams as they learn. And that can be through resources, that can be through coaching, that can be through time. Next to more money in our paychecks, teachers need time, right? And so the first step is just clarify what the work is. And second, you've got to provide adequate support. Third, you have to monitor the work. And when I say monitor, I don't mean micromanage, but instead, we've got to monitor the work so we can identify the strengths of the team, as well as next steps, areas that we can assist as they move forward in their work. And then finally, and I think it's a super important step, is to validate and celebrate. We've got to validate when we see the work happening. We've got to validate that with teams, and then celebrate. So those four things, boy, if I could coach any leader, when I coach leaders in schools or district leaders, team leaders or leadership teams, I say, let's just get clear on these four things: clarifying what the work is, supporting teachers as they learn, monitoring that work, and then finally validate and celebrate.
Man, what an in-depth answer. I love it, Bob. That was impactful. So super clear. I love those four steps. You had shouted out instructional coaches, and I want to do the same. I know on our campus, as far as our PLC model, when I got there, it was a hot mess, and they took it upon themselves to clean it up and do a better job. And I wish, they had the Simplifying Journey book to help them with those 6 action steps, but they started to do the work, and we saw a better result. But I also want to just highlight the fact that you're talking about just not making assumptions as leaders. A lot of times will put in an initiative and just assume that they know how to do the work, that they know how to decipher different things, do these various procedures and strategies, and that's not always the case. So, that's our job to make sure that we're, like you said, clarifying the expectations and then showing them the way in which we want them to do it. So love those 4 steps. Bob, will you just real quick, I know you do a lot of other work, right? You had touched on the fact that not only you're an author, but you coach administrators. I know that you go
Yes.
and you speak. So for those who are looking for more information on any of your resources or just want to touch base with you, maybe they have a question or even have you either coach them or speak at an event or at their district, how may they get a hold of you?
Yeah, great question. So I can be reached on Instagram at Bob_Sonju. And then also I've got a landing page at solutiontree.com. And you can go to solutiontree.com, look for presenters, and find my name and reach out and contact me that way as well.
Awesome. We'll make sure that those links are on joshstamper.com. So you can head over there. It's an easy click to get a hold of Bob. And then also for those who are on YouTube, it'll be in the show description. Also, you can head over to Joshua Stamper where you can push that subscribe button. Also, this video will be on the Teach Better community page also on YouTube. So make sure you're joining that group as that's a growing community. And one last time, I'll let you know that Magic Mind, you want to get your free trial, you can head over to the link on the screen, which is magicmind.com, Aspire to Lead trial, and that'll get you your 3 drinks for free. And that way you can test out, does this really work, right? So it is supposed to give you a sharper mind, lower your stress, and better your energy. And I promise all 3 things will happen. So give it a try. Costs $0 to you. So make sure that you're trying that out. With all that being said, Bob, thank you so much for all the work you're doing to assist our leaders, our aspiring leaders, and our educators. I know Solution Tree does such a phenomenal job, and you have a ton of resources as you are continuing to create these books. And looking forward to the new book, the Handbook of Highly Effective Teams, coming out in October. And hope to continue to check in with you and appreciate all that you're doing and being a guest on Aspire to Lead.
Thanks for having me, Josh. It's been a pleasure.